Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about power, batteries, power distribution, how we calculate what we need. So we'll be talking about that in the second hour. So put your questions in now, if you would like to, in Makana. And let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one comes from John Preto in Las Vegas, Nevada. And John here on the panel says, any comments on Facebook's overproduced, in quotes, MetaQuest Pro announcement yesterday?
Go ahead, John.
This is really interesting. I watched it yesterday, and I mostly liked what I saw. They show photorealistic avatars finally, which made a lot of sense to me, which are a ways out. But the new MetaQuest Pro headset, little pricey, $1,500, but they showed their vision for the future for the metaverse and what they were doing and their technology associated. But they got 50% of the press they got beat up on, which was really unfortunate. And the same rhetoric over and over and over. It reminded me of a political campaign almost.
Which was that it was overproduced?
Yeah.
Well, is it because Apple doesn't overproduce at all? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it was a pre-recorded, right? It wasn't live, and I think that's where as we look at production, it just makes a lot more sense to pre-record these, and so then it's going to feel more. It'd be interesting to compare it and try to figure out why it felt more overproduced. And I have to admit, I haven't had time to watch it, so I'm speaking a little out of turn, but I'd be curious to find out what about it made it feel overproduced. Do you have any sense of what was different that they did that Apple didn't?
All their product shots were Apple-esque, right? With the shadows and the light reflections, et cetera, and obviously they try to make it look like an Apple event. And so for Facebook, which are usually underproduced, this one was well produced, I thought, and had a lot of valid points in it, and they're moving in the right direction.
Right.
So I was really surprised at them getting beat up by 50% of the press getting beat up in the same headlines over and over and over again. Really strange.
Well, the funny thing is that a lot of times it'd be interesting to analyze it. So I think that we need to take a look at it and try to figure out what caused that, because a lot of times it's not by accident. When people jump on something, someone says, it's very common for a corporation to come to you and say, I want a keynote that looks like Apple's. And you're like, well, that's super expensive and hard to do. It's not as trivial as it would sound. And so I think that sometimes you can try too hard, and if you don't hit it right on, Apple really has a knack for hitting the note, right? It's that it is very produced, but it doesn't, except for where they are tongue in cheek, it doesn't look like it's overproduced generally. They do a couple things that are kind of fun and push it, but for the most part, it still feels like a presentation. So I'd be really interested to take a look at what they actually did and figure out whether that made whether they really hit the notes the same way. It may be, it's like someone singing the same song, but some people would say, "Oh, that was a great, authentic way of rendition." Another person say, "Oh, another person comes and does that song," and they're like, "Wow, they really overdid that." Go ahead, Bill.
This may be a little bit of the start of the clash of the Titans, though, because there's been a lot of press the last few days about the fact that Zuckerberg was on an interview somewhere and took Apple to task, at least in part, over trying to own the metaverse that they're trying to do. So I think there's going to be some jockeying for position in hearts and minds of people. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think that they're definitely worried about it. I think that Facebook is worried about it. They should be. I think that the challenge that they have is that Apple's not trying to own the metaverse. Apple's trying to hand it off to all their developers, and so they're not building a unified infrastructure that people can pass geometry and data and everything else to like if you have a world as an Apple developer, it's potentially you could just hand that off to somebody else, or let them interact with yours. And so those are things that I think a lot of folks that want to own that area aren't that excited about. And so if they get defeated in their ability to really dig into the iOS world, and then Apple distributes it to everyone, it's definitely a competitive challenge for anybody looking at that area. Next question.
I had something to add real quick.
Sorry, John. Sorry, Mr.
So they specifically went overboard to try to tell everybody that they're not trying to have a closed architecture on the metaverse. In fact, they had Satya Nadella come on from Microsoft and say that they were super supportive of
Right.
the headset and the metaverse. And then they had the CEO of Accenture, and they made it overtly clear that they didn't want to have a closed system and they wanted to open it up to everybody.
We'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
Next question.
Next one comes from Simon Ray in Shrewsbury in the UK. What are the main differences between an ATEM Extreme ISO SDI and the ATEM Constellation 2ME? When would you choose one over the other?
So I chose the Extreme over the other. It took me a little while to remember why I did that, because when I look at it, there are more inputs and more outputs from the 2ME, the Constellation 2ME HD. So there are a bunch of services that are more available. They have, it seems like their engine is fairly similar. You've got one super source. You've got, and I don't know whether there's the same number of downstream keys. I don't really track that as much as some. But I think that there's more capability in the 2ME, but there's no interface. So you can, if you're going to use software, if you're going to use something like Isadora or Mix Effect Pro, if you're going to use those types of things, then the 2ME may be a better solution for what you're doing. If you want an actual hardware interface, a panel, the problem is with the 2ME is that you're going to have to buy a panel, for it. And that might be either a Scarhoy or one of the Black Magic hardware panels or potentially a Stream Deck. So if you're thinking I'm going to use a Stream Deck or I'm going to use software, you're probably better off with the 2ME. If you're thinking I'm going to sit there and actually run a little show, and I was looking when I bought the Extreme SDI, I was kind of thinking I just want the most compact little thing that I can just run a little show and have actual keys that I can hit. I don't know if the next time I buy one, I might buy the 2ME, but it's just a little bit more money, but it does have a lot more capability, but you have to think about how you're going to run the show itself. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, the ATEM Mini Extreme on my tabletop with all those HDMI cables, it just looks like a problem waiting to happen. So I vote for the 2ME as a better solution stuck in the rack. And if you really got to control it, then use the software or, like you say, the Scarhoy. I think that's a cleaner, more sensible way to go about doing it.
Next question.
Jesse Kessler looks like saying, I'm looking for something that might not exist, a recording device with one XLR in, one XLR out, and phantom power for the recording, but not for the output. I'd like to capture audio before it gets to the board, as I can't always get a clean board feed.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'm not sure. So here's what I think may be your issue here. If there's an operator running the board, if I was doing that, I would be a little hesitant about having you hang an outboard device on before my channel input. There is a thing on almost all the boards called a channel insert that will do that, but it allows the board operator to at least understand that there's signals coming into the board before he's wiring it out, for all intents and purposes, to somebody else for an outboard process. I would think that if you did something like that, if you got permission to do it, and anything went wrong with the audio chain, your device would be the first thing to go as they just clean up the patch in and out of the board. So I used to carry a channel inserts, and if I got on the good side of the board operator, I'd just say, can I have a channel insert? And they would do that, and I would take my individual feed out of there. But those are my thoughts.
Just depends on where you sit on the food chain, like what you can tell people you're going to do. So a lot of times it's, there are, other things that you can do. Like, for instance, if you're really afraid of the board, another thing that you can think about is using some kind of preamp at the mic level. Now, this depends on whether you have a wireless or wired mic level, but you can also have a preamp there that's going to turn that mic level into line and then split that. So you can run it through a splitter. It can be a passive splitter. You get one, and then you still have a point of failure there, but it's a relatively low one. But those are things to kind of think about. I don't know of any anything that has one XLR. There's lots of things that have lots of XLRs and then a couple XLR outs, but one XLR in, one XLR out. It's kind of an interesting product idea, but that actually records. But I haven't actually seen one. Go ahead, Bill.
I have a little device that I've used just a couple of times when I've had to do voiceover off-site and on the road, and it is a small connector that just has XLR in and XLR out, and it has a battery inside, and it produces phantom power separately. I would suspect that if you're looking for phantom power, a device like that...
I think that it's the recording part that he's trying to handle, though.
Right, but I was thinking that in line with a splitter might take care of you, but it'd be a little janky.
Yeah, it'd still be it'd still be mic level.
Yeah, it'd be mic level.
I wouldn't want to split that. Next question.
David Barton in Memphis, Tennessee. I would like to scan my home with Polycam, but the scan time is too short to move through the whole house. Is there a way to append to a scan or increase the scanning time? And he's using an iPhone 14 Pro.
Yeah, I've done some pretty large scans with Polycam, and I find that it doesn't really work past a room. So if you go past a room, its registration and everything else starts to be more complicated. Now, what you can do is save these out in pieces and try to bring them together. So find some overlap. So if you think about, I'm going to scan this room, I'm going to scan a little bit into the next room so that I can get that overlap. And then I'm going to scan that room and then have a little bit of overlap. Then, you have to think about your 3D package, whatever you're going to use to tie those back together. So that's something for you to think about after that, is to figure out how you're going to, whether it might be, whether it's Cinema 4D or Blender or something like Recap. I mean, Recap is built for this, so it will look for features. Now, a lot of the problems that you have here is that the resolution that Polycam generates is not really high resolution, so you're going to have a hard time getting them to all go over each other. But what you're looking for is that little bit of overlap, and then you're going to register those points. This point is right to here. I'm going to snap this point to this point, this point to this point, and you can get those to pull together. There's going to be overlap, and there's going to be a lot of cleanup. So I don't think it's necessarily the best solution for trying to scan an entire house. I played with it. I haven't been able to scan my house with Polycam. I scan areas of my house with Polycam, but trying to do a whole piece. The problem you get into is anything more than about 30 by 30 feet, you're walking around. And as you walk around, Polycam loses its registration. So by the time you come back around, you're a couple inches off on the floor or other things. And so I have been able to get an entire bar where a band was playing, but it took a couple passes to try to get that. And again, the resolution's pretty low as well. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he notes, Alex, you mentioned that most YouTube content creators are creating content in 4K. What could they be using to stream in 4K, considering Blackmagic Design hasn't made smaller 4K atems yet?
Good, Peter.
A couple of comments. One is content creator does not necessarily equal live streaming. That's the first thing. So you can, I can create 4K content using my Decklink cards and my Blackmagic camera, and I can cut and do all this stuff and then upload it in 4K to YouTube. Then there are, and I'm sure, Alex, you've used them. They're out of my price range right now, but there are boxes you can get which will connect to YouTube to allow you to RTMP in a 4K system. But you better have cameras and switching gear that will switch 4K properly.
Yeah, good, Bill.
Yeah, I think the biggest push that I saw in the early days for the reason to go to 4K was, even if you're still doing HD, you can punch and reframe. So if you have a two-shot, you can isolate each person really easily and not lose any resolution. That also makes sense to me about why Blackmagic did the 8K camera and things like that. That is double the 4K resolution. So if you're outputting eventually in 4K, you can do the same thing. A lot of us who create content do that punch in, reframe a lot, because it really gives you a variety of looks out of a single camera setup.
Yeah, and as Peter touched on, the vast majority of YouTubers do not live stream. And I would say that when I say vast majority, I would say 99.9%, maybe 99.999% don't live stream. So the 4K, the 4K needs don't really matter. What they're capturing on is cameras that are capable of capturing 4K. They're pulling that little memory card out, putting it in their computer and editing it. So they're, that's, a lot of them are using, everything. I see behind the scenes every once in a while, but they're using everything from the Blackmagic 6Ks to the Sony RX A7Rs are really popular, or A7Ss are the ones that a lot of them use. And then, so there's those are the real workhorses. Those two I probably see more than anything else. The Canon series, the 500s and 300s are also popular, and Reds. Some of the higher, I think that a couple folks are using red cameras for that as well. I think Marquez Brownlee and I think Justine both use Reds for some of their bigger shoots. So those are the things that that they're shooting on, but they're not trying to shoot it live. They're just posting it live, and some of them are posting it in 8K just because they can. So that's kind of the direction they're taking. Go ahead. Next question.
Next one comes from Greg Gretschmeyer in Topping, Virginia. And Greg says, suggestions for a budget-friendly wireless microphones may need up to 4 lavs and 1 or 2 handhelds.
Go ahead, Peter.
Yes, I found the Comica UHF wireless lavalier Boom X-U2, and I think I can share screen. This device on Amazon, it's UHF.
I'm seeing a different. I'm not seeing a device. I'm seeing a YouTube or YouTube help.
That's the wrong one. Sorry about that. That was my mistake. Why didn't it share? Interesting.
Yeah.
There.
Anyway, go ahead. Tell it. Just tell it. Which one are you talking about?
This one.
Uh-huh.
That works very well, and it's UHF, so that has the added advantage of it doesn't get blocked by the human body, depending on where the and those little packs will accept either a lavalier mic or they have a built-in mic themselves. So depending on where you put them, and it's a quad receiver, and the quad receiver will actually, you have your choice of, it will mix the 4 channels, or you can output 4 channels to a mixer.
That's great. Go ahead, Bill.
You say budget friendly, and that's got a wide range in there. Some people's budget are in that kind of zone where you want to spend, under $100 per lav or something like that. That's a little harder to work with in this kind of note. But listen, there's been a big change in wireless. It used to be, to get serious wireless, you had to spend upwards of, I'd say, $1,500, $2,000, and you could easily get up to $5,000 a body pack receiver unit for the top end stuff. Almost all the manufacturers, Electrosonic, Sony, all the names that you normally would associate with that, have now done less expensive lines because they realized that there was a lot of interest in the bottom. So if you look carefully, you can sometimes, I don't think you can get it for down in the 100 to 200 range, but if you can extend a little bit and go 250 to maybe 300 or 400 per unit, there's some pretty darn decent systems that are wireless in that price range that you might be able to work with.
Yeah, and the ones that we've leaned on the most in the past in a lower price range are the Sennheisers. So the Sennheiser ENG 100s, I think, are the ones that we've used the most. In the lower price range, it's not as low as what Peter showed. I haven't used those ones, but and then also Mickey suggests the Shure SLXD as another option for something that's less expensive. Next question. Mitchell
Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. What did you use for switching video before the ATEM Mini?
Go ahead, Peter.
My Decklink card in my Mac Pro, and talking to my copy of Memo Live. That was it.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Grass 100, believe it or not, because I didn't have any need for switching before the game changer ATEM came out.
Yeah, the ones that I used before this were the data video. Well, there was one software switcher, and I can't remember I can't remember what it was called. So there was one software switcher that was just a disaster. We literally bought it for $2,000, and I think I found it in a box a couple years ago. Like it just found its way to a box, and then we never returned it, never got it back. It just was a disaster. This was in probably the late aughts, so 2008, 2009. It was just a horrible little piece of machinery. And I think we did maybe half of a show with it, or one show with it, and decided we're never going to use that again. And then we did use a data video. I think it was a DT2000. I think it was a little briefcase. You could open it up. It had a screen inside. It would take 4 channels, and you could cut a show. You could cut a show with it. It was a little hardware switcher. It had 1 or 2 inputs for HDMI, so you could take some graphics in. We ran our graphics from Keynote and just it had a Luma keyer. It had a chroma keyer too, which was horrible. And so we used a Luma keyer to put it in there. That's when I learned that Luma keyers could be higher resolution than chroma keyers. And so this little 2000, and we streamed a bunch of the early Salesforce keynotes when they were trying. We kept on telling Salesforce, you should stream these things, that you could stream it. You don't have to just record it and post it. And so they went ahead and so we traveled around the world with this little suitcase and streamed these out. And they went out to they streamed out to Wirecast. So it was video out to two laptops with Wirecast, and we would stream to Ustream, I think is what we used for that. And so anyway, that was how we got started. As the shows got bigger, as Salesforce specifically got their shows got bigger, we moved to a Panasonic 450. So there was a little 400, and then the 450 was a bigger panel, had two MEs, and we had I don't know, I can't remember, it was like 16 in and 3 out or 4 out or something like that. And so anyway, so that was where it that's how we began. And then we never really used a lot of the bigger switchers. I mean, they were used in the events that we did, but for the web crew, we found that Panasonic, we made it all over the world, to do those things. But it was heavy and painful. And then when the first thing we got from Blackmagic were routers, 16 by 16, and then we bought the little. We had a show in 2012. It was we had to do it was for a convention, a political convention, and we did 10 seconds on that political convention. Maybe 20 seconds of that political convention, and for that 20 seconds, we needed an enormous number of switchers to do. All we needed was to do a bug, and it was the cheapest way to do a bug over a video was to use the little production switcher, the little one that's like 1U. But then we also bought some 2MEs and the 1MEs and with the fins in the back, that were, so back in the day, the Blackmagic switchers were great because they didn't make any noise, but they had these huge heat sinks on the back, and we actually put silent fans on them to pull even more air through them. And they're rock solid, nothing's moving. And they didn't make any noise at all, which was fantastic. And that was really how we got started. And then we started buying, more routers, and the routers also had heat sinks on them. And so it was a very different experience than what we see now. It was really out of the box thinking, and then they went more into the box thinking, and looked, kind of grew up into looking more like a regular router. But back then, that's probably circa 2012, 2013. And then we just started buying, lots of Blackmagic stuff. Yeah. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, it's interesting the transition from, again, the big switchers. I mentioned the grass. Even the smallest grass required a rack full of DAs and switchers and routers and stuff. And when it made that transition over to being portable, I guess some of the first stuff, the new tech devices, not many people trusted them. And then more of these self-contained switchers became available. So just interesting seeing how the timeline worked for all of that stuff. It's certainly come a long way.
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, and people still experience some of this, we had some challenges with the TriCaster, and so that was kind of why we also just looked at it as really expensive, so I was like, well, I can buy X number. A lot of what I was doing were relatively simple shows that were in lots of locations at one time. So we would be doing conferences where we had, I've got 6 rooms. I don't have to do crazy things for those 6 rooms, but I do have to cut the cameras in those 6 rooms, and I have maybe a little bit of graphics to add. So as a result, it was way less expensive for us to buy a bunch of relatively inexpensive Blackmagic switchers than it was to buy one TriCaster. And then we got used to having more inputs. Then we got used to having more resolution and more inputs. And then we got, so it was one of those things like most are, by the 2016, we had a production trailer, 28 foot or 24 footer production trailer. And most trucks can't have primary and backup switchers, and primary and backup. We had primary and backup everything through the entire thing. And you could never afford to do that with most other platforms. And I think that that's really where where Blackmagic really took off was it created an ownership experience as opposed to a rental experience. What we used to do was rent all that gear, and then suddenly we could buy it and own it. And that meant that, it greatly changed what we could bid on, what we could do. Also, it changed how well we were ready to go, because when you rent stuff, you're getting it right before you need it. When you own it, you can build up. So we were able to build all of our kits and test all of our kits weeks in advance, and something we could never afford to do before. And it made our execution much more seamless and less stressful, because we knew when we left the building that everything was working, and it had been working for a week, not that it was all going to show up the day before, and we're going to hope, or 2 days or 3 days before, and we were going to hope it was going to come together. So it was definitely a big change. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Ike Potter in Hanover, Germany. He's back again with, will the entry model MixPre 3.2 ever be produced again by Sound Devices? In contrast, MixPre 6.2s and 10.2s can be found new. Is there a new entry model coming, or does defect in the supply chain cause the lack of MixPre 3.2 models? Any thoughts about this?
I thought we got an email somewhere that said that the MixPre 3s were back in, or going to start shipping this fall. So I don't remember exactly what the date was, but I think over the summer, I got some email that said that that the supply chains were starting to loosen up, and they were going to be able to start putting stuff back out. But I'm not 100% certain. The real problem is that the A to D converters became super expensive for everyone, and so it didn't make sense to make the 3. I think that's at least that's what I heard. So anyway, so I think that's the problem. The 10s make more sense than the 3s to make cost effectively in a way that you could sell them to people that they would understand. So I think that's been the challenge, but I think that we will see the MixPre 3s probably come back into shipping, I think, by the end of the year. Next question.
Next one comes from John Foltz, and he says, has anyone used the Blackmagic Studio Camera 4K Pro? Looks like an interesting setup for high school or college sports broadcasts.
And I think this is the new one. I think Jason, I believe, has this. I think he is our in-house expert in using it. It looks great, and I think that for high school or college sport broadcasts, it could be a pretty good solution. I believe that there's an adapter for it that will get you a B4 mount, so that you could get traditional sports lenses onto it. And I think this is the one that has the Ethernet out, so it could potentially be a lot easier to run these out. Of course, you still need something to convert it. I'm kind of surprised that Blackmagic came out with cameras with Ethernet without a switcher with Ethernet, but we'll leave that alone. It seems like that would be an obvious thing to do, but maybe not. Anyway, so those are the things to kind of look at there. But I think it does look like a pretty good camera. In fact, probably one of the better cameras for exactly what you're trying to do. I mean, you are the target audience when you look at, small corporate, high school, college is exactly what those cameras are built for. Next question.
Graham Cardwell is up next. He says, what are the likely causes of losing sync on video? I sent an MP4 to a client who cut excerpts and shared them on. The resulting clips played out of sync, but had been okay earlier. The route was a Mac to a PC, Windows, or app default player issue, maybe?
Yeah, it's from cutting the MP4. The MP4 is it's a long GOP platform. It's a long GOP system. So basically, you have to cut at the keyframes or you're going to lose sync. So let's see if I can pull this out. So basically what happens is that when you think about how things are compressed, an MP4 typically has what we call groups of frames, so GOPs. So the GOPs are, 60 frames, and they have both B, which is looking both directions, and P, which is looking back to basically figure out what the B frames and the P frames are partial frames. And then you have keyframes that are on either side, or iframes that are there. Now, this is, let's say, this might be a 60 frame GOP. And so you've got 60 partial frames and then one full frame, but all of the stuff is pinned to that. So what happens is that if you cut it here, the audio, the video has to jump over to here or to here. It can't cut there because there's no frame. There's no whole frame in between those iframes. So there's a weird little program called MV or AVD or MVD or something like that we used years ago, maybe a decade ago, that would snap to the iframes, and then you could cut it. But if you don't cut on the iframe on an MP4, you're going to lose sync. Typically. Now, some of your editing packages will correct for that. Like Final Cut, I think will actually correct for that. But you should never edit a delivery format. So I'm just going to say, never edit a delivery format. Convert it to a editing format or to something that you can actually work with. So you got to convert it to ProRes or DNX or something else that's going to be designed for this. So if you're going to edit something like an MP4 or H.264, I know that the editing packages say, oh, I can just drag it in. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. Don't listen to them. They're lying to you. So just take that thing, run it through compressor, run it through media encoder, turn it into something real, then edit it, and then export it out. Everything will run much better. Go ahead, Bill.
Exactly what Alex said. That's why we talk about things like mezzanine codecs and transcoding constantly. If you're a professional editor, you don't know what's coming in over the transom into your shop. And it could well be one of these oddball codecs that don't have most of the frames that are real frames. So the transcoding process, and particularly to a mezzanine codec, which is something that your edit system really likes, and let it do all those pre-calculations, build all the frames, you will edit happily, and then you can turn that into something that is more compressed later. But in the middle, you do not want compression. It is your enemy, or particularly that kind of choppy long compression. It's your enemy.
Yeah, and one of the things to do there is to, a lot of times I will set up a preset inside of compressor, and then that preset is what all things that are delivered to me are going to go through. And that way, not only is it a standard format, but it's the same format. So everything is going to be ProRes this or ProRes that. It's not going to be, I tend to work in ProRes. So all of those things are going to be converted to not only a ProRes format, but the same ProRes format. So that I can edit that without and then it's not just editing, it's also the export. The export format. And if you're, and I think that that's because you can get to a point where, like, we've had issues with Resolve where we throw a bunch of stuff in that's junk, or someone threw some stuff in that's junk. And then what happens is the edit works fine. We go to export and it starts to crash. And so you want to make sure that and that's really hard to go back and fix. Next question.
John Fultz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania says some of the Blackmagic devices are using an RJ45 connector for talkback. How does that work? I can't find much info on it.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, there's one thing to remember. I don't like the industrial design of this, but connector does not equal Ethernet. Right.
Yeah.
Right. All they're doing is someplace to attach 8 wires easily.
Right.
Now, what you do at the other end of that wire is up to the talkback device. And I've seen some belt pack devices that take Ethernet in and turn it into audio, as an example.
Yeah, and some of those
take the connector in, I should say, and then turn it into a headset.
And some of those are actually using they're actually a networkable device, but most of them are not. As Peter said, they're designed to that's a really convenient form factor to move data, whether it's video or audio or comms or whatever. It turns out you can go to any Best Buy and buy what you need to run your show. That is a huge value when it comes to, if you ever have tried to find 100 feet of SDI at the last minute and you're outside of LA and New York, good luck. It's a really great thing to be able to just go to a regular store and grab that. So that's really good. Things like the Behringer Alternet, same thing. Like, you can't put that into a network. It's designed to talk point to point to the system. So those are the kind of things. It's just using the RJ45 wires, as Peter said. Next question.
Next one comes from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. Any opinions about the Wirecast Gear 3? Telestream is pushing it, but I have not seen it. Thanks.
I believe the Gear 3 is their hardware solution for Wirecast. And so I think it's a good idea. I think if you're serious about using Wirecast, if it's an interface that you're excited about, and that you want to use, and you want it to be a little bit more stable than just running on any old computer. The advantage of buying a computer or a pre-built system that has this is that it's really built to the spec. They've really looked at how you're going to use that software and built something that is going to support that software correctly. So I think it's an interesting play. I think it's going after where it's going to a place that many people have gone, whether it's a TriCaster is a software in a box, essentially. There's a couple other ones that have come out in that area. Vimeo has its own, or Livestream had its own Livestream box that they pushed. And I think Livestream is what really inspired Wirecast to think about taking something that was basically software and then putting it into a hardware component that was more built to spec. It definitely reduces this. If you're a Wirecast user, it should increase the stability and reduce some of the anomalies that you would normally see, but it's still software in a box. So you just always got to remember that. Next question.
Mitch Hill, Wilmington, Delaware, here on the panel. What's your favorite audio recording device for recording second audio on location?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, we're really lucky now that there's really only one manufacturer that does it really well, and that's Sound Devices. Before that, with the analog world, people had Nagras and other devices that they would accomplish it. But Sound Devices just has all the right stuff, all the right spigots, all the right ins and outs. And I'm really, really interested in an 8 series. I would love to get one.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and they're fabulous, and that's really good stuff. I mean, my progression, I started on Nagras back in the ancient times. I think I moved on when I started having to own my own rather than renting to Tascam. I eventually had a Zoom H6 that I used to run. And the term in kind of the production world is double system. That means you're recording your audio for air on a secondary device rather than on the camera, because usually cameras didn't have the best audio inputs. But now almost everything that I'm seeing is running on laptops using Audacity or some form of iOS device using an interface to record double system there. Any kind of computerized system for recording audio, they're full quality, and they're just easier nowadays than mechanical things, and they don't wear out as much. So that's my thought.
The other one that we see a lot in the market is of course the Zoom recorders, and I think that a lot of them, they've gotten way better. Like they've definitely improved over a period of time. And then there are a variety of other advantages to things like Zaxcom is another one that people use because Zaxcom has in the US holds the patent for being able to record to the transmitter, which is something that I think Deity licensed from them as well. So those are other things to look at there. I will tell you, Mitch, that I would highly recommend it. So
that takes some serious money to make that happen.
It is so nice. Next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington up next. No success with Logitune G-Hub or webcam settings. What app maintains field of view, that is zoom percentage control, over a Brio on an Intel-based MacBook?
Maintains, that is, yeah. So the maintain part is the hard part. So what happens is that you have you set your zoom, and then so you get it to just where you want it. And what we're seeing is when Zoom makes the request for your full res. So when you go into Zoom and you're in this little panel, it's not requesting the full size. As soon as someone pins you, or as soon as you go into the presenter, it asks for the full range. And for whatever reason, the Brio just immediately pops out to its widest. And so suddenly and that's super annoying. So it's one of the things that I really like about the new Insta360 is, number one, is it doesn't do that. It doesn't take that because it's not UVC. So it's not being controlled by UVC. So it doesn't care what Zoom asks for. So it doesn't do that. And even if it does, just as a safety measure, what I do is I open up the interface for the Insta360 and I set a preset to what I just set it to. So I get it to exactly the way I want it, and I leave it as a preset. If anything happened, I can just hit that button and it'll come right back to where I had it set. And I think people who have watched this for a while have known that I have really leaned into the Brio for years. Like it was really the workhorse that we had there. But the more I use the Insta360, the more I like it. It is the only thing that worries me to send it out with people is that it's a little delicate. I might even get over that because it's just the performance of it is so much higher. The quality rendition, the control of the camera, and the fact that I'm sitting there. I use it for Michael Krasny's show, and the interesting thing there is that I pop it open to a separate window on his computer that I'm looking at, and I can if I need to make some fine adjustments. When we were using the Brio, it was like, I can't interrupt his show Now I just look at the screen and I just tap on the screen and I move it a little bit and I just reframe him. And you'll see at the very beginning of the show me kind of reframing to get it all just the way I want it. We're going to do a recording this Friday, and I'm going to have that little camera there, and they're both subjects are in the room, and I'm going to be able to just go back and forth as they're talking. It's really pretty slick. So anyway, I think that I've kind of moved on. I mean, we still have a lot of Brios, but I think that we're not going to buy any new ones. I think that we're kind of done with that. I think that Insta360, again, this is after now using it for a month or 6 weeks or whatever, and using it all the time. And from a web camera perspective, I don't really want to use anything else. Next question.
David Brady in New York City. Podcast.ai now generating interviews that never happened. Are we entering a dangerous Orwellian place where gullible folks will fall for this stuff? What checks should we put in place to prevent falling victim? And he's got a link there to Podcast.ai.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I used to have a crazy friend that had one of those answering machine messages that made you think that he was there talking to you. Hi, this is Bob. Hey, what are you doing today? And then halfway into the conversation, you realize you were talking to a recording. I've got the same feeling about these podcast AIs. As you start listening to it, and then you start saying something's not quite right here, and then you come to the realization this was generated by a computer. So I guess that epiphany moment, or whatever that moment is, and you go, aha, this isn't real, bothers me more than the fact that it's just an AI. Don't like it.
Yeah, I think that I think this it's interesting. The one that we're talking about, I believe, or the one David's talking about here, we talked about a little bit on Mac Break yesterday because it was Steve Jobs being interviewed by Joe Rogan. But that interview, of course, never happened. And it really went through everything that they've done and found it decided how it thought that they would respond. I think that we had talked about it on the show. If they had added a little bit of atmospheric, just a little bit of room tone, they probably would have felt even more real. It's just that there was these weird silences that occurred. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Somewhere in the mid-1970s, I found a copy of Harper's Magazine, and there was a story in there called The End of Photography as Proof of Anything. From that day forward, after reading that article, I just understood that this was going to continue, that you were never going to be 100% certain from the mid-70s on that what somebody was purporting to you to have been a document of a real thing was in fact real. And I think you now have to rely on other things other than the fact that this looks reasonably like I expect it to, right? Because they're getting more and more sophisticated every day. And it's so easy to fool people, particularly if they're sending you a message that you want to hear. That's almost always the time you get the most concerned about whether you're being manipulated or told the truth about.
The other thing to think about is that even though the images and other things were true in the past, or might have been true before AI, or they were not manipulated, but they weren't true, is what I would say. Just do a search on Google for what tourist locations really look like, right? And so just the angle that they're taken by changes how you view those. And that is, I will argue, as much a manipulation as what we're doing now. So for instance, I love going, when I go to Japan, we usually have safety days and for production, because it's such a long trip, we want to make sure that anything that has to get done before or after, we have time. So we have an extra day or two usually. If nothing goes wrong, we go see Japan. So one of the things that we do is go to Yudanaka. You can do that in a day. Not really in a day and a half, 2 days. You can go to Yudanaka. Yudanaka is where the macaques have learned to sit in the hot tub. There's a pool, and the macaques sit in that area, and there's lots of pictures. If you do search for Japanese macaques, hot tub or hot water or whatever, you'll see all these macaques. And I can actually recognize them all because I've been there enough. Like, oh, that guy is not very nice. And this one is, and so you feel like when you see the pictures, and most of us take the pictures, so it feels very infinite. It's a cement. It's a cement pool that you can walk right up to the macaques. Like, they don't care. You can get right up to them and take pictures of them. They're used to it all the time. They're well fed. They sit there and again, the impression that you have and the impression that I had when I first went there was that it was going to be in nature or something like that. But it's just a park, and those kinds of things manipulate exactly how you think things are actually happening. Look at the pyramids. If you actually take a wide shot of the pyramids, they're right up next to Cairo, like they're right up against the city, and then even the simplest things about where you put your camera. If I take my camera and there's a crowd that's protesting, if I go wide, it shows that there's 10 people. If I go close and high, you don't know how far it is, and your mind extends that out to thousands of people are upset about something. And so the thing is that we do this all the time. We manipulate people all the time with just the framing. Now, did we manipulate that photo? No, we didn't take it into Photoshop, but we did manipulate the framing to tell a story and to give you an impression. And so we just have to be very careful when we say, oh, this is ruining everything. I mean, we've been ruining everything for quite some time. Go ahead, John.
Mr. Brady, resistance is futile. You'll soon be assimilated into the Borg.
One thing that I think is really interesting about it, though, is that the potential, I really thought about it listening to it, and the potential for simulating history for kids, to think about how a conversation might have gone. Not that it was true, but what would it be like if Abraham Lincoln was talking to someone, or what would it be like if and that visualization, it's almost a dramatization of that process, I think is potentially an interesting thing where you let the AI sit there and just churn on every written piece by a given person in the past, whether it's Aristotle or Abraham Lincoln or others, and then let it try to come up with what would that actually say, and again, not as the truth, but as a pointer and to get people excited about it. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, like any good tool, it can be used for good or evil. That's kind of what you just described, the good case. There's obviously the evil case where you're putting out disinformation by design. But the reality,
and disinformation accidentally too.
We need to teach our kids critical thinking.
My kids will ask me relatively simple questions about something, and usually I often give them most of the time I give them correct ones, but I often give them absurd answers. But I say it in a straight face, and I give it a lot of detail and everything else. And that's specifically like they'll look at me and they go, "I don't think that's true," and then they'll go search for it. But I do it relatively often, especially when they were younger. Now they're too smart. They usually can see around my tricks. But when they were younger, I was trying to teach them literally to question everything and not assume that anybody is telling them that truth, and they should go find it from a couple of different sources, as opposed to just believing one source because one source of the truth is not the truth. It's one source. Go ahead, Bill.
The other thing is that manipulation, which I think we all do, it gets a bad rap because I think we all do it. The image capture of me on this show that I use most often. Why did I pick it? Well, I didn't look so bad there. It's not one of those ones where my mouth was weird or my eyes were closed or something like that. So I gave up 100,000 frames and chose this one frame because I thought it not only looked like me, but I looked okay. Right? So we're doing that constantly. We're vetting things. Whenever I'm taking a photo, even if I'm just in public, I know it's not for publication, but I'm always manipulating to try to get the best, most pleasing to my aesthetic sense photo that I can, even if it's something of not that much value. So I think this is part of life. We're constantly trying to improve our results. And because I work in the visual field, I'm constantly trying to refine my capability to make someone look better if they ask me to take a picture. And even if casually somebody asks me for their phone and says, "Can you take a picture of our group?" I try my best to make it the best photo I can, which is a manipulation. It's not just, that's what you look like here. Well, and if your eyes are closed, your eyes are closed, that's real. No.
And I think about photogrammetry a lot in this area, because photogrammetry, the way it is, if you have an object, we have an object here, and we want to build a 3D model of it. We want to know what it's like in the real world. We can't do that from one camera. It can't figure out what that is. We think we can, but we can't know that that's the case. The key is having multiple angles looking at that same object. Those angles should be covering the same object, overlapping each other, but not from the same position. And as you do that, it's able to figure out where all the little pieces are and what's actually happening. I think about that as news too. If you think about this, instead of cameras, we think about this might be NPR, and this might be Fox, and this might be Al Jazeera, and this might be MSNBC. As they look at a piece of news, what they all agree on is probably pretty close to the truth. Like, whatever they said happened, that they all said happened, is probably relatively close to the truth. Everything outside of that, the context and everything else, is their opinion. And and if you just carve off, okay, they all agree that this actually happened, a missile actually hit this location, or these people did this, that is most likely the truth, because all of them are saying that thing. What that means and what its future is, and all those things are their opinion. And it's important for us as viewers to carve away the facts from the opinion. And it doesn't mean that we don't listen to the opinion and don't listen to that context, but we have to know that that's what that is, as opposed to thinking that all of it is the truth. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, Apple Music is now available on a Microsoft Xbox. Why do you think they're doing that when on the surface it cuts into the market for their own hardware?
Go, Peter.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's cutting into the market for their own hardware in the least, because I think they're probably saturated on things like iPhones and iPads at this point. But if you go back in history, Apple Music or precursor iTunes didn't really take off until they went on Windows machines, and then the product went off. So I'm not surprised they're doing it. They're just expanding the market opportunity is what all they're doing. Doesn't hurt them.
Next question.
Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware says, I watched the movie Grosse Pointe Blank again to catch the audio transition using the Guns N' Roses version of Live and Let Die and the elevator version. Marvelous. Any other similar movie audio moments?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I remember Alex had brought this up, that there's a scene in Grosse Pointe Blank where John Cusack's walking into his old home, which has now been converted into like a 7-Eleven, and the music is playing, and it's Guns N' Roses doing Live and Let Die. And he walks through the doors into the mini mart, and it transitions into an elevator version of the song, which is just marvelous. And I had to watch it again just to catch that one moment. And it occurs to me there are other movies that are out there where similar trickery has happened, and it's all done very well. One of my other favorite bits that I see over and over again is the Wilhelm scream. That's repeating audio trickery in movies. Yeah. The other quick one is John Landis was the first to play any scene that happens in an elevator where the people are standing or waiting for something to happen. They almost invariably play The Girl from Ipanema.
So what's really funny about that is that he does that in the movies, and I find myself, anytime I want waiting music, I always want to have Brazilian, like a bossa nova. It's not always Girl from Ipanema, but it's often that that style. And we were doing we were prepping for a show, and there was going to be talking, and then they were going to play 2 minutes, but the 2 minutes wasn't ready yet. And so we got some bossa nova to play into that, very much in the style that you're talking about, and played it, and I just thought it'd be funny for me. The whole staff thought it was funny, like, because you don't notice it. To your point, you don't notice it, but we all have this thing, like the classic waiting thing in a hotel or an elevator is this, Girl from Ipanema or something like that, and it's somewhere as an American, it's somewhere in our subconscious that's what we expect. Go ahead, Bill.
Another one that's fun is the 1974 movie, The Conversation. That was one of the first ones that really made the sound capture, an audio guy, kind of the hero. They're the one that recorded the conversation of the plot happening that really drove the whole plot of the movie. So it was interesting to me as I learned more about sound to go back and revisit that movie and think, how many of these things are real, and how many of them have they manipulated for the purposes of the plot? But it's still an interesting thing to see how sound works.
Go ahead, Peter. Well,
it's a little off to the side. I remember watching an interview years ago with Alice Cooper, and I can't remember, it was one of the late night news shows that came on, and the interviewer asked, how did you know you actually made it in the business? And Alice Cooper responded, I knew I had made it, but it also scared me to death when the first time I heard one of my songs as elevator music.
I'm sorry. The only time anytime someone says I saw an interview with Alice Cooper, all I can think of is Wayne's World. Milwaukee. Anyway, so anyways, I think of that every single time. But yeah, there was a song that I liked there was a song I liked in high school by a band called Gazebo, and it was called "I Like Chopin." And I heard it. I thought I heard it as a elevator music, and then I realized it was just Chopin. They were just playing it like as it plays a little bit of it. So anyway, next question.
Harshit Trivedi here on the panel from Daytona Beach, Florida. On the iPhone 14 Pro, is the match charging speed for MagSafe 15 watts? What charging pad or stand would you recommend for at least a watch and an iPhone?
I don't use stands, so I don't know for sure. I just have connectors for it. Mine is, if it depends if you're doing it. It depends on how fast you want to do it. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I have a new iPhone, and I've just been charging it with a standard Apple charging block, and I'm doing it physically. I have a key charger beside my bed, but I use that for my watch, and it had a particular power supply with the puck for the watch, and the watch charges really quickly on that stand because I think it's well matched. But I haven't had any problem with my new iPhone with standard charging with just a generic 15-watt charger. It works really well, and I don't have a problem with it taking too long.
Yeah, it is a sorry, I lost my place there. The ones I travel with are NGAN. They're NGAN power supply, some kind of chargers there. So that's what I'm usually looking for as far as regular, a regular kind of fast charger. I think that the one that I have bought most recently is the, let's see who makes this. I don't even know if it's specifically, it doesn't have really a name. Sacrac. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I think one of the things we have to be careful of is we're slightly misreading it. It's not saying the max is 15 watts for the device itself. The iPhone, they all will request how much power they want, and they will accept as much power as they need for fast charging. So that's not really the problem here in terms of what can the MagSafe support. The device is going to pull what it needs and move on.
Yep. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, Cisco has the Catalyst 9200CX compact Ethernet switches, but they aren't available yet. What compact, manageable gigabit Ethernet switches would you recommend?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about which ones I would necessarily recommend. I mean, there's a lot of manageable gigabit switches. Yeah. I don't know if I have a good answer for that. We use kind of bigger ones or smaller switches, but we don't really manage the switches. In fact, usually when I have switches, for most of the stuff I want them to be as dumb as possible. I don't want them to do anything, especially have any eco settings. That's usually the thing that we try to make sure that they don't have is eco settings. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, would it be worth it to upgrade from my Quest 2 to a Quest Pro for recreational or therapeutic use of VR?
Worth is a big word. Will you enjoy the upgrade? Probably. I don't know if you need to upgrade to it. I think that it's a big price jump. I think for folks who are pretty serious about what they're doing, I think it might make sense. I'm not totally certain that it would be necessary to do that. But I would definitely. I think that I don't know if it'd be necessary to make that upgrade, but I do think that you're going to keep on seeing what the future looks like. So for people who are developing for it, for people who are thinking about what might be possible in the quote unquote metaverse, it's probably worthwhile to make that happen. But I think that if you're looking for something for just recreational or therapeutic, I wouldn't do it from a therapeutic perspective. It might be something that your therapist would buy, and have people use as part of a managed process. I don't know if it would necessarily be something that I would recommend to an individual just for that purpose. Okay, so we are now shifting gears to our second hour and talking about power. Power is something that we don't probably talk about very much on this show, but it is something that affects all of our shows. So and here in California, it affects it more often than other places because we never know exactly when we're going to have power. And so especially in Northern California, it gets shut off pretty often compared to other places outside of inside the United States. It's very unusual. It's unusually high. So we think about it a lot, and it is the thing that will oftentimes get you when you're working on smaller productions. It becomes less of an issue. You go in and you have a small kit, and you may have need a couple 20 amp circuits. But then once you get to the start getting into larger kits, when you start loading in road cases and so on and so forth, power management becomes something that you think about all the time, and it's something you have lots of meetings about, because it's not trivial to and it's very easy for you to run out of power. And it happens to everyone. We had at one event that I had, the broadcast truck was given the wrong cable to the shore power, and we looked over and we thought that and it was not the right amperage that was set up there, and it turned the entire power cable, which was thick, like 3 inches thick. It turned it all into a big resistor, and we looked over and we thought that we could smell something. We were like looking around, and then we noticed that there was smoke coming off of the cable. That was coming off the cable into the truck, and we called somebody, and there was a lot of upset, and people ran around, and part of a very large convention didn't have coverage for a couple hours as they figured it all out. So these are things that happen at all levels, and you really have to pay attention to it, because it's not just something. When we have problems with signal, people are upset. When you have problems with power, people can die. So you definitely want to, we want to talk about that. We'll talk about power here, but we also want to make sure that we're talking into the fact that this is something that you definitely want a professional to work on as you put this stuff together. So yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Well, I just wanted to note, as a power consumer for many decades, most of the power in America seems to be pretty stable. And I just know I have 4 experiences. I have heard of problems like Alex's in Northern California, and I've heard from my friends in Texas that their power grid is very iffy here and there. But I lived in Arizona for many, many years, and it was almost uninterrupted. And I can't count on one hand the number of times over all the years I lived there that we lost power. So tip of the hat to Arizona Public Service for doing a great job there. And here in Southern California, I've had the same thing. I've been here 5 years now, and I maybe a half an hour of power outage over all that. So I think it's localized, and I hope everybody can get, because there's nothing worse than unstable power delivery into an area. It makes your life miserable.
But you should always assume that you're going to have unstable power delivery. So, it's just a better way to do production. Production is better approached as a pessimist than an optimist, just in general. So, so you generally want to not trust almost anything that comes into your system. Where that you really start to look at that is, basically UPSs are something that we put into anything that matters. So UPS, I have, the system even that I use in my house here I have 3 UPSs. I have one that's managing my lights, one that's managing all the subsystems that run the video, and then finally one that is managing my router. And the reason that I have a whole 1500 V-amp for my router and my modem is because if we lose power, it means that as long as Comcast didn't go down, I still have internet until that runs out. And that right now is set to about 6 hours. And so I can take a hit there. We are definitely, as we move forward, looking for, I'm right now in the midst of research of what kind of generator do I want? And what I'm looking at right now, for instance, is a mixture of battery, large battery, solar, as well as generators, so that there's a mixture of things that I can leverage to make sure that I continue to have power. But it's not just that we want to look at how to deal with catastrophic power loss, but also just how do we manage a lot of the idiosyncrasies of small power. So how do we handle batteries, and how do we handle power distribution, those types of things as well. So we'll jump into, if you have questions about that, go ahead and throw those in, and we'll just go ahead and jump into the questions. First question.
Our first one comes from Danny Law in Malaysia. If one of the 3-phase incoming cable to the electrical distribution panel is burnt before the ELCB, what would the cause be due to overdrawn current? Shouldn't the ELCB tripped first to protect the distribution panel?
Go ahead, John.
I don't know the answer to this. I just wanted to wish Danny happy birthday today.
Oh, happy birthday, Danny. All right.
I don't know the answer to that either. so anyway, but happy birthday, Danny. Let's go to the next question.
And Justin Blankenship in Lebanon, Virginia says, is there a way to clean up power in the existing infrastructure where DMX lighting faders create electricity buzz when fading up or down? Maybe an inline conditioner or something.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess one of the things that we try to do in that situation is to separate those. So separate those the power, separate the circuits that those are on, so that I mean, that's the big thing, is trying to get on separate circuits so that they're completely not, as much as you can, not touching each other as they work through that. And that's something you have to think about a lot in power, is to try to not have it. You want to subdivide your power and figure out exactly what is what is doing what, and especially with audio. Audio is the thing that is probably the most sensitive to different power fluctuations or things running next to it or things that are on the same circuit. But yeah, so Mickey suggests that you bring a separate generator, and you should do a separate generator or a separate, some type of separated circuit to make that actually happen. Go ahead, Bill.
And there's such a high variability, particularly we used to use a lot of old silicon rectifiers, and they were just noisy as heck. They put out tons of RF and almost as bad as the old neon ballast and things like that. They've gotten better over time. So a DMX is just a control protocol. So whoever manufactures that system might have put in faders that are not shielded as well as they could be, or maybe use an older technology. And that's why you're getting so much RF out of it, or some sort of buzz creating thing. Usually that's RF, but it could be something else. And so I would just look at how old the technology is, and it might be time to replace those DMX control units with something more modern. They've come a long way. I've had less problems today than I did 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Yeah, oops, I'm sorry, I got myself in the wrong thing here. Next question.
Next question comes from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What are the considerations when selecting an uninterruptible power supply solution for general equipment? Are there particular devices which require special consideration?
I mean, one of the things you want to look at is whether you are, it's going to be a standby UPS or doing something where it's basically what we would call a double conversion UPS. And so the things that we like to use when we can afford them basically are charging a battery. So the power comes in, it charges a battery, the battery discharges to the devices that we have. And of course, that's going to give the cleanest signal, in my opinion, to all of our hardware. And so that's what we'd like to look at there. The bypass is basically there's a gate, and if you lose power, it immediately switches to the battery. And so that's most of what you buy at Best Buy is going to be a bypass UPS, where basically it's going to switch over to it. But going through the battery, it doesn't last as long. The battery doesn't last as long because it's in constant use, and it's more expensive. So it's a much more expensive solution, but it almost guarantees that you're going to have clean power to your devices all the time. Because the other thing to know, especially when you're working in all parts of the world, the thing that really can get you is dealing with not perfect power. So you have power, but that might be the wrong type of power. It may not be quite the right voltage, that type of thing, square wave versus sine wave. And so you end up damaging your power supplies. And so we lose a lot of power supplies, for instance, in Africa, where where the lines dip. They don't go away, and your devices still work. But there's this fluctuation that's going on all the time that we have trouble with. Go ahead, John.
Alex did a great job articulating that. The double conversion stuff is great. What I look for in UPSs are the batteries readily available to be replaced. I can't tell you how many UPSs that I've bought and used that I go buy new cells and I get them at a fraction of the cost. All my 5 UPS sitting here.
Which UPSs are you using?
APCs.
Yeah.
1250s. 12. I got 1250 over here. I got a 2500, a big boy that's got the NEMA plug on it. But I have a Batteries Plus right across the street from my house, and I buy the cells for $30, and I put them in, and you got a brand new unit.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that the 1500s are kind of I didn't know the 1250s had removable batteries, but the 1500s are what we buy pretty automatically because they have the battery in there, and all you got to do is when you buy it, you spin it, you pull it out, turn it around, shove it back in, and now it's on. The nice thing is that it also means that when you're traveling, you can pull it out, spin it. And I don't know what the current rules are, but we used to be able to ship those and put them in, as long as we spun it and we identified it on the outside of the case. I'm not sure if they're still that way. So, but again, definitely you want to be able, the batteries will go bad, so you definitely want to be able, you don't want to buy a UPS unit that you can't swap batteries for. Go ahead, Bill.
And most of these are rated for a particular spike suppression, because that's the thing that can usually confound these. So if you're getting a decent UPS to continue to get clean power through, if those voltage spikes come down the line for some reason, they have really fast acting protection against that. So pay attention to that spike suppression as well as the voltage regulation.
Yeah, and I will say though that the number one thing that our UPSs protect us from is someone tripping over a cable. So it's like it's not having someone just knock something out, someone runs over a power cable or something like that. We think about things being catastrophic, but most of the time they're just dumb. And someone did something dumb, and you want to have something that's not going to lose power. I will say that I've been in events. We were at an event at the XL Center in London, where they just didn't calculate the power correctly. I mean, this is what happens. You don't get all the calculations right. And when we say it can happen to anyone, remember that in New Orleans, the stadium went out during the Super Bowl. So this is like not calculating or not. And usually what happens is it's not that they didn't calculate it. It's that this gets back into that. You want to sit at 40 to 60% and preferably near 40% of your capacity. The reason for that is when something fails, it's going to put more pressure on something else. If you're at 80, 90% of your power usage of what the facility is capable of, if something trips and puts more weight on something else, you end up with what we call a cascading failure. So it just overwhelms that thing, which then now both of those are overwhelming the next thing. And before you know it, everything's off in the NFL and Beyonce's trying to buy time, So anyway, so those are the things that you have to kind of, you have to think through. But we had one where you could see who had been prepared. Because the entire facility went dark. There's like 5,000 people in there, and the whole place goes dark except for the emergency lights. And in our back area, the only thing that had all the monitors and lights on were our little section. And our client ran over and said, "Why aren't you streaming?" I'm like, "We are streaming. Just all we're getting is black." And so we put up a "We'll be right back" slide, and we were able to do that. And that's what's important from an encoding perspective, is that we were able to put up that slide and have it all work because we still had power. And it definitely makes you, those kinds of things, when that happens and you're still prepared and still working, it is useful. And we've had I probably had 5 or 6 different occasions where the entire production, everybody in the room lost power except for us. And so and that has clients really think that you're probably a good bet for them. And the ones that we use, by the way, in our trailer were the Lippert UPSs, were the double conversion that we used. Very expensive, but very, very useful. Next question.
Chris Sabato in Albany, Oregon says, we're having issues with equipment tripping our ground fault circuit interrupt plugs. The plugs are outside, and so GFCI are required. Is there anything I can use between the equipment and the GFCI to help?
Go, Bill.
Just remember, this is the primary safety thing. Those GFCI circuits are designed to make sure that you never become the ground for an active line, which can damage you and potentially kill you. So whenever you're talking about working around something that is designed to preserve your life, you just have to be very, very, very careful about, look for the original reason those GFCIs are going off. Don't just try to work around them. It can be really dangerous.
Yeah. So the one thing to if you're popping the GFCIs, it means that you're over the rate. And so again, what the GFCIs are there anytime there's water. So it's outdoor, kitchen, bathrooms, you'll see by law, at least in the United States, you'll see an outlet that has a little button on it that can reset its circuit, and that is designed. If you get over what it's rated for, it's designed to pop out and protect you. That means that if you put your fork into the toaster oven,
Don't do that.
I won't say whether I did that once or not. But before the GFI, you might have put the fork in the toaster and then been shocked and frozen, and your cousin may have had to tackle you off of it. So anyway, so I would highly recommend not doing that. The GFCIs are very useful. What you want to do is start looking at and this is something to know for every rack. What is the rack drawing at use? Not when you turn everything on, but though you do want to pay attention, because sometimes the highest usage of the rack is when it turns on. All the fans come on, it does a bunch of stuff, it's doing a bunch of restarting, all those things go up. So look at that. And what we use is some version of a kilowatt. A kilowatt is a plug you can plug your device into, and that's the simplest version. There's a lot of better, more complicated versions of it, but you can buy those on Amazon, these little kilowatts, and you plug it into the wall and you plug your thing in, and it'll show you how much power you're using, how many watts and how many amps and everything else are you using through that circuit. And so when you do that, you can get a sense of, okay, this is what I need. And if you're knocking these GFCIs off, what you probably need to do is find what GFCIs are on the same circuit. Well, and that doesn't matter as much because they're breaking at the circuit, but figure out where the circuits are. And again, once you start doing things where you're tripping circuits, it means that your system is now pulling enough power that you need to pay attention. Like you need to start paying attention to what you're doing and what you're plugging into. A lot of times when we request, like on our little rider, hey, we're going to show up, and one of the things we'll say is I need this many 20 amp circuits. Typically on a really big show, we'll ask for more amps and so on and so forth. But on small shows, we'll say I need this many 20 amp circuits, and usually it's 2, 4, 6, 8, whatever. Or usually on the drawing that we have, we tell you where we need the circuits and which independent circuits we need at every table or behind where our racks are. But it's subdividing your circuits is probably the next thing for you to do. And you can subdivide them between two plugs. That's going to get around. That means that half your gear is on one thing and half your gear is on another. And both of them are probably on their own UPSs, those types of things to make sure that you can make that work. But definitely that's also where UPSs become useful, because if you knock that circuit out, you can at least keep going until you figure out what to do next. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. Up next, the APC Back-UPS Connect CP12142LI, Eaton 3S Mini, and other mini UPSs, originally designed for security system backups, run on DC rather than AC, and have runtimes measured in hours for devices like ATEMs. Are these common outside of the Midwest?
No, but they sound great. We haven't used those. I haven't used those for those. And the ATEMs should run for hours on many things if that's the only thing that they're on. If there's a lot of things, they just don't draw very much. So I imagine that if I plug my Extreme into my 1500 VM APS, probably last 5 or 6 hours, on it, not minutes. And again, that's also where you want to look at the thing that I like about larger UPSs as well is I like to have the digital readout, because a UPS that doesn't tell you what's going on is really not particularly useful to me. So having a UPS that has that says, this is my power draw, this is the percentage that I'm, this is how long I think I will last. If I lose power, these are the kind of things you want on a UPS to know that what's going on. The best ones, the ones that we have in larger racks, are networkable. So you can put them on a network and you can send them commands, but you can also get emails from them. Like, hey, I lost power. And we used to have those in our DC facility, and it was great because we lost power a couple times, and you're able to go in and sort that out if you needed to. Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia, back again on his birthday. A handful of portable solar battery packs have UPS features built in when it's plugged into an outlet. What's the recommended switching over time when using desktop computers or other sensitive equipment?
It should be instant. Like, you shouldn't, the way a UPS should work is that it should instantly give you power so that nothing drops. It shouldn't drop power when you lose power. So there should be no switchover time in what you're doing there. And that's, again, whether it's goal zero or John, what is the one that you're using? The solar. Did you say you had a solar?
It's Geniverse is the one that Keenan and Chris have. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's Geniverse, Goal Zero, Jackery. They all make ones that have, they all have some version of solar and a battery, and you can, and then plug them in. You can plug them in to charge the battery to top it off, but you can also have the things you're looking for is I want to be able to top it off with solar from the car, from the house. So those three inputs you want to make sure that you have inside of one of those kind of portable battery systems. But you should be able to then pull the switch over. And I use those as battery systems. I don't use them as much as a UPS. So, but UPSs should switch over instantly. Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois says, regarding surge suppression strips and those that protect against low voltage, how can you tell if the protector is still good after an electrical event? Do they wear out or are they one-hit wonders?
We consider them one-hit wonders. Anything that took a hit for low voltage is one thing, but if a surge protector took a surge, we're not going to use it again. Go ahead, Bill.
I think that's very safe. Most of the time, power strips, the switch acts as a circuit breaker reset. If you turn it off and on, it might function. But I agree with Alex. If you had something that tripped it, particularly if you get the pop and maybe that horrible acrid gas of life coming out of your component, don't ever rely on them again. Replace them. That's the smart thing to do.
Next question.
James Babbitt, San Diego. What is the highest wattage for recharging a new iPhone or iPad? Would you use a charger with power distribution?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Well, so most devices in the Apple ecosystem and other things, you're talking about iPhones and iPads, they're very sophisticated power circuits. And it's not just delivering power, it is really talking to both units. And so the device will ask from the computer what it needs up to the maximum it can tolerate. So as long as your power wall wart or whatever is supplying enough to reach its maximum limits, it's going to figure out what it needs and get it just right. Third-party equipment, sometimes that doesn't work as well. So I'm always leery about using third-party chargers, third-party power supplies, wall warts, and things like that with highly sophisticated electrical equipment or electronic equipment. And in the Apple ecosystem, I try to stay with, other than cables, there are some cables I trust. They're Anchor and a few other brands that I think are as good. They're MiFi certified and everything. But as long as the charging device source has enough wattage to get to it, the internal power management in those systems should take care of everything else.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, when I use a Tripp-Lite isolation transformer, and he notes the 1800 watt 15 amp version, before my Eaton 5P 1.5 volt kilovolt UPS, it's 1100 watts, I noticed that there was a lot more heat in and around the room. Removing the UPS removed the heat. Could I have been overloading the house wiring?
Could have been, but yeah, I don't have an answer for that. I'm not sure. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana, currently using an Ames Power 4000 watt and 12,000 watt surge with 4 battleborn 100 amp batteries that have served me well for the last couple of years. I'm looking at upgrading the Ames. Would a 4,000 watt continuous be able to carry a production trailer?
It depends. It depends on how much your production trailer is going to draw. That is the 4,000 watts is not a lot for a production trailer. So I don't know if that would be quite enough I'm just trying to think, because it's like a couple 20 amp circuits. That's not in the United States anyway. That probably would not carry. You're probably looking for at least 8,000 to 10,000 to do that, or a couple of them to make that work. I don't think that 4,000 watts of continuous would be enough to carry the whole production trailer, in my opinion. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, in my former residence, I noticed that I'd hear a pop in my audio when I turned my fan on or off, but a Tripp-Lite isolation transformer cured the issue. Why could that be?
Because it's now separating that separating that voltage. So when you are turning it on and off, it's changing the draw, and so you're hearing that pop. And you'll hear a lot of small issues with power that are connected to to each other, and that's why you want to try to think about what circuits you're on. Try to isolate the circuits that you're using, especially audio. Is going to be the most sensitive to it. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, the most isolation items like humbuckers and things like that, that's all they are, a transformer in there, because that's two coils of wire, and they are creating an electromagnetic field between the two coils, but they're not technically connected or touching. That's the point of a transformer. So that's going to make sure that it isolates a lot of that kind of transient hum and pop. That's why they do it.
Okay. Short hour today. Not as many questions. So we'll let you all run off. I want to thank the producers for the questions that we did get for the second hour here, and thanks to the panelists. We can't do this without you. And also a thank you to the great crew that always makes all of this happen and pulls all this stuff together. So thank you so much for the hard work that you're putting into making this all go day after day after day, every day. So anyway, so thank you all. We appreciate all of you. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours.